Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast featuring garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is May 12th. Today in garden history, we celebrate the birthday of the French field marshal, writer, and member of the princely family of Ligne, Charles Joseph Lamoral, who was born on this day, May 12th in 1735. Charles once wrote, "I should like to inflame the whole world with my taste for gardening. There is no virtue that I would not attribute to the man who lives to project and execute gardens." High praise. And today we also celebrate the birthday of Edward Lear, the English artist, musician, and writer. He was born on this day, May 12th in 1812. Edward is remembered for his literary nonsense in poetry and prose. He once wrote, "As for myself, I'm sitting up today for the first time, partly dressed." Something the cucumber said when oil and vinegar were poured over him, salt and pepper being omitted. Get it? So cucumber, oil and vinegar, no salt and pepper. Okay. All right. And Edward also popularized the limerick. And I thought I'd share it with you today, an Edward Lear limerick for gardeners. Here's what he wrote. "There was an old person so silly, he poked his head into a lily. But 6 bees who lived there filled him full of despair, for they stung that old person silly." And today we also celebrate the birthday of Florence Nightingale, the English social reformer, statistician, and founder of modern nursing. She was born on this day, May 12th in 1820. Florence earned the moniker the Lady with the Lamp during the Crimean War because she would make her rounds to visit wounded soldiers with a lamp during the night. And the American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow used that term, the Lady with the Lamp, in his poem Santa Filomena, which he wrote in honor of Florence's work in Scutari Hospital. Florence's life started simply. She was named after Florence, Italy, the city where she was born. And as a young girl, she and her sister had their own garden to plant and tend. When Florence was 13, she collected flowers with a 77-year-old botanist named Margaret Stoven, and together they gathered and pressed over 100 different species of plants. And this charming story of Florence and Margaret was featured in a fabulous book that was released in 2008 by Richard Mendelsohn. Today, the flowers that Florence and Margaret collected are housed at the Natural History Museum in London. As an adult, Florence once wrote, "Poetry and imagination begin life. A child will fall on its knees on the gravel walk at the sight of a pink hawthorn in full flower to praise God for it." Now, as a nurse, Florence believed that flowers helped with the morale and recovery of her patients. And personally, the foxglove was Florence's favorite flower. And here's a fun little tidbit about Florence and flowers. She received a lovely bouquet every week from William Rathbone, the man who founded the Queen Victoria Jubilee Institute for Nurses. Apparently, he was a big fan of her work. In 2020, one of the most anticipated gardens at Chelsea was to be dedicated to Florence. 2020 marked the 200th anniversary of Florence's birth, and the garden was to be called the Florence Nightingale Garden, a celebration of modern-day nursing. Instead, the garden debuted at the Chelsea Flower Show in 2021. The garden featured images from Florence Nightingale's pressed flower collection, and her beautiful handwriting was copied onto timber walls in the garden. Today, Florence is remembered in the Florence Nightingale Museum in London, and she's also honored with the Florence Nightingale Rose, a pretty pale pink, fragrant rose. And today we also celebrate the birthday of the German botanist and phytogeographer Andreas Franz Wilhelm Schimper. He was born on this day, May 12th, in 1856. Andreas was a major player in the early days of plant ecology. Andreas coined the terms tropical rainforest and sclerophyll and is remembered in many species names. In 1901, Andreas's work was cut short due to his untimely death at 45 after contracting malaria in Cameroon. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, P. Allen Smith's Garden Home by P. Allen Smith. This oldie but goodie came out in 2003, and the subtitle is Creating a Garden for Everyday Living. Well, to me, this book is a garden classic. You get to know a little bit about P. Allen Smith's biography, his family's love of gardens, his experience working in the nursery business, plus all of the great relationships that he made working in some of England's top gardens. He could write a book on that alone. Fascinating stories. But in all seriousness, this book is so foundational to gardening. It's a great book to give new gardeners, and it's also a wonderful book for gardeners who are considering a redesign or, after a long winter, feel like they need to brush up on their skills, because the bulk of this book is dedicated to Allen's 12 principles of garden design. He'll talk about aspects like framing a view, having texture in the garden, rhythm, pattern, color, and so on. Now, I thought I'd share this little excerpt from Allen's introduction, and here he's talking about how he created the garden rooms on his own property. He writes, I began working with the various outdoor rooms to see how they related to the house itself. I recognized an opportunity to design strong, unbroken lines of sight or axes from one garden room to the next. Like an open door, these visual sight lines would allow visitors to stand in one room and see directly into the next. After positioning these openings through portals or entries, I further divided the rectangles into 9 garden rooms and then began to imagine how each space could have its own personality and yet remain part of a cohesive whole. And then I love what he says next, because he's talking about paths. And I always feel like paths are so underrated, and they're almost an afterthought for so many gardeners. So he says, as I laid out this plan on paper, I added an entire circuit or path that looped around the house, connecting one garden room to the next. And from here, I imagined hedges and fences that could be the walls for each room, and then arbors and gates that could be the doorways. And then he goes on to talk about more ways that he created these garden rooms. And so in this book, he not only goes through his 12 principles of design, but he also takes you on a tour through each of his garden rooms because they help illustrate each of those principles. It's a fabulous book. It's a garden basic, and it's so affordable now. It's been on the market so long. Anyway, this book is 224 pages of P. Allen Smith's expertise, his 12 principles of garden design, and his fantastic personal garden. You can get a copy of P. Allen Smith's Garden Home by P. Allen Smith and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $3. Now that's a steal. It'd be a great gift for yourself or for a garden friend. Finally, we end the show today with a botanic spark from May 12th in 1943. It was on this day that the Belvedere Daily Republican posted an article entitled Gardeners Get 9-Point Plan on Care of Hose. And bear in mind, this was printed back in 1943 during World War II. And here's what it said. If mindful of the rubber shortage, you're wondering how to coddle your garden hose through its important victory garden job this year, an expert here has a 9-point program for hose care that may mean the difference between a backyard farmer's success or failure. W.S. Richardson, manager of the Industrial Products Division at B.F. Goodrich, outlines his 9-point plan for taking care of your garden hose. So here they are. 1. Never drive a car over your hose. 2. Don't leave it lying out in the sun. 3. Coil it neatly and hang it up. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? 4. But not on a spike or a sharp-edged stick. 5, be sure it's drained first, for water left in the hose will damage the fabric reinforcement. Hoses have come a long way since then. 6 and 7 kind of go together. 6 says, don't turn off water at the nozzle. Here he wants you to turn it off at the spigot, I'm assuming. And then 7, don't try to stop the flow by doubling the hose back on itself, because whether you turn the water off at the nozzle or double that hose back, you might risk a blowout. 8, don't drag a hose over sharp stones in a rock garden. Point taken. And finally, 9, don't pick an oily spot on the driveway or floor of your garage as the place to coil it, because oil destroys most rubber, and you might end up with a leaky hose, and then your once promising victory garden will be burned up by drought. So there you go, B.F. Goodrich's 9-point plan on the care of a garden hose from 1943. Well, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening. And just a reminder that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.